the myths out there is that to be effective in sales, one needs to be a strong extrovert. And that is not true. There's some evidence that works against you.
Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Daniel Pink. Dan is the author of several best-selling books on business, work, and human behavior, including Drive to Sell is Human. His TED Talk on science and motivation has been viewed more than 20 million times. Wow. And his most recent book is The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. Dan, welcome to World of DaaS.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Really excited. Now, in your book, To Sell is Human, which I loved,
Thank you.
You say sales has changed fundamentally in the last decade or so. Like, what is different about selling today compared to 1 or 2 decades ago?
Well, I think that there are two big differences. One of them has to do with the substance of work in general. We did some research back then where we asked a very large selection of full-time employees in the US and Canada a bunch of questions about what they actually did all day on the job. Not what their job description said, but what they actually did. And we found that white-collar workers are spending we found an average of spending 40% of their time in essentially persuading, convincing, cajoling, influencing other people. Now, the average is a little misleading because it was bimodal. So you had some people who weren't spending a huge amount of time on that, and then others spending most of their time on that.
And that might include like all the time they're spending on like Slack internally and on email and even on like, posting funny memes out and stuff.
Well, yeah. I don't know if the memes qualify, but the first two definitely, because it's like and here's the thing. The point of it is that if you look at the guts of what people actually do all day on the job, no matter what their function is, a good portion of it is kind of sort of like selling. Yep. That is, and so that's what that
so
was.
A lot of it might be selling internally.
Absolutely, it's trying to convince somebody to join your team rather than another team. Trying to convince your boss to stop doing something stupid. Trying to convince your employees to do something different or do something in a different way.
Yep.
And so that's one point about, I think, how selling has changed, is that we're basically all doing it all the time.
So essentially, like before you might have just been like a quote unquote engineer, and now you're really like, at least a huge portion of your job as a salesperson.
Absolutely. In the multidimensional kind of way. And you see a lot of that with engineers. You see even a few software companies basically not having formal salespeople, but essentially using their engineers as kind of forward deployed engineers and salespeople out there. So that's one insight. The second insight is that I'm convinced that sales has changed more in the past 20 years than in the past 2000.
Wow.
Because almost everything we've known about sales has come from a world of information asymmetry, where the seller always had more information than the buyer. When the seller has more information than the buyer, the seller can rip you off. Information asymmetry is why we have the principle of buyer beware in our laws and our commerce.
Yeah, caveat emptor.
Yeah, exactly. The seller, you have to caveat the emptor because the emptor has all the advantages.
Yeah.
And so, but what we've gone in this world, we've lived in a world where buyers had not much information, not many choices, and not many ways to talk back, to a world where they have often as much information as sellers, all kinds of choices, and all kinds of ways to talk back. I think that's a fundamental change. I think that's caveat venditor. I think we're in a world of seller. I think we're in a world of seller. We're in a world of seller beware now, because it's harder to take the low road. So the combination of those two things, to me, represents a kind of pretty significant transformation in what selling is, who does it, and how they do it.
And are there certain kinds of people that are better in today's environment, maybe weren't as good in yesterday's environment?
That's a really interesting question. And I think it's a really important question. I'll give you one dimension on that. Because, in this, once I laid out this case, as you know, I looked at what some of the research said about how to do this effectively. And one of the myths out there is that to be effective in sales, one needs to be a strong extrovert. And that is not true.
Yeah.
I mean, it is fundamentally not true. There's some evidence that works against you. But it doesn't mean that being a strong introvert is better. What the research tells us is that the most effective people in sales are ambiverts. people who are somewhat introverted and somewhat extroverted, not strongly one way or another. They're ambidextrous in a way. Like let's say you're playing basketball. If you're ambidextrous, you want to be able to dribble to the left and dribble to the right.
Yep.
So the most effective sellers are ambiverts. That is, they're in the middle. And the thing about that is that most people are ambiverts. Myers-Briggs has completely poisoned us to thinking that we're in a world of I's and E's, when in fact we're in a world where most people are somewhere between the two.
Yep.
So the most effective sellers are ambiverts. So most of us have, in some ways, the native personality type to do that. I think that there are other attributes that make you effective today. Things like curiosity, discovering problems.
Because you're asking good salespeople are always asking questions.
And not pro forma, perfunctory, manipulative kind of questions, but questions that come from genuine curiosity.
Clearly want to learn. Yeah.
And certainly in B2B, because in B2B, my view, I've said this many times, is that B2B sales is essentially a form of management consulting. That is, what you have to do is you have to understand the business to whom you're selling in some ways as well, or better than they, to discover problems they don't realize that they're having.
Well, I found there's been kind of like two successful types of salespeople I've worked with in the past, at least with selling software and data. One is that kind of relationship salesperson going to take you to the Yankee game and build that like long-term relationship with you. And build that trust. The second one is the product kind of salesperson where they really know the product super well.
Yeah.
And they could help you, and they may be really bad at relationships, but and in general, I found that the product sales people, at least in my experience, have completely outsold the relationship salespeople. But in a world where we're going to have like AI can potentially like really help you on the product side, and maybe not like the AI might not be able to take you out to the Yankee game anytime soon. Like, could we see that flipped?
It could be. I think it's very plausible, and I think your analysis is absolutely spot on. I think that in some ways the relationship driven. Now, you want to have relationships, obviously.
Yeah, of course, you want to have
legitimate relationships. But I also think that companies are under especially B2B, companies are under so much pressure to make the right decisions, make the right choices, stay alive, that like they'd rather have a great product than a trip to the Yankees game ultimately. And so I think that in some ways those relationship driven folks, some of them are very good, but some of it is almost a residue of the old way of sales, where you had information, where the buyer didn't have many choices, where you were the font of information, and you could get by on, as Arthur Miller famously said, a shoe shine and a smile. And I think that's changing now. I think you make a very good argument that it could flip back. So that AI actually does you have an artificial intelligent agent that helps you discover your problems and find a solution. And maybe the salesperson's job is to, manage the AI and take you to Yankees games or Orioles games, so you don't feel completely untethered from human beings.
What do you think of wealth managers? Because in some ways, like, they're very much like a sales class. A lot of it is almost like taking you out to these games to try to get you to convert slowly as clients, or take you to the ballet or whatever the person's interest is, the wine cellar or something.
Yeah.
Like, how are their jobs going to change?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, they're in that they're two different. They're two different varieties. They're with two different kind of fiduciary standards.
Yeah.
I mean, and so the one that has, I can't remember precisely what the language is, but there's one where you have to put the fiduciary standard, where you have to put the best interest of the client first. The other one is that you have to take into account the best interest of the client.
Okay.
The second group are going to be toast, because they're essentially they're commissioned salespeople for insurance companies and financial products and so forth.
Yeah, they're taking VIGs on other products, and so they're pushing products to their customers.
And legally, all they have to do is factor in your best interest. It doesn't have to be determinative. The other ones with a fiduciary standard have to abide by your best interest. So I think it's foolish to go to anybody but those ones with a fiduciary standard. Now, that said, when it comes, I think that their jobs are changing a little bit in the way that you envision the that AI is going to take over change the selling. So, for instance, that's happening already with things like not for necessarily like ultra high income, but pretty high up there, like with things like Betterment and other kinds of robo advisors.
Yeah, for sure. Or even
Because
Vanguard,
like an ETF of
Yeah.
So financial wealth managers are doing less kind of asset allocation because anybody can do it. You can go to a calculator online and do that right now.
And
But
speaking of buyer beware versus now the buyers are so much more well informed. They understand the power of diversification of low fee funds. So they're coming in much more knowledgeable than maybe our parents' generation did.
Yeah. So the financial advisors at some level, just they just as like B2B salespeople have become management consultants. I think in some ways wealth advisors have become wealth advisors and quasi therapists, life coaches,
concierge, like helping you
the
find
concierge services or things like
yeah.
that. It's like, oh my gosh, my family's taking an emergency trip to Mauritania. I need help.
Yeah, totally.
And
that's actually worth a lot of bips if someone does a good job.
It might be. The other thing about it is that wealth management, wealth is not only money.
Yes,
wealth is your relationships with your kids and other people, the legacy that you're leaving, the influence you want to have on the want
charitable giving, all these other things that they could potentially help you with holistically.
You want guidance on those kinds of things. You want someone who can see downstream a little bit and says, okay, what are going to be the consequences when everyone has kind of figured out that you should go into that you just park your money in index funds with that charge like 3 basis points a year and just stick it in there early and wait. Well, once everybody figures that out, that's going to have some consequences. So you, financial advisor, tell me what to do about that. But I think financial advisors they're doing something that is sort of at the intersection of therapy, clergy, and life coaching.
And many of those things I think AI is getting good at. They're getting very good at being a therapist as well, too, right? So
actually, that's been very impressive. The ability of AI to empathize. You see some research among physicians, the ability to empathize, and also just the ability to ask questions that elicit the kind of answers and self-discovery that therapy is supposedly about, and for a lot less.
On that front, like, do you think that's gonna, and also not just a lot less, but maybe some people feel uncomfortable talking to a human.
Sure.
But they might feel better about talking to, they might be more truthful talking to a robot or something.
Could be. I mean, I think we're going to see the implications of that. I can also see the other way. It's that people feel that ultimately I don't know. I'm just guessing. I have no idea. But
different types of people.
That for some people, the experience of being in therapy is simply sitting across is partly the instructions in how to analyze your feelings and that kind of stuff. But I think for other people, it could simply be there's another person in the room sitting across from me who's listening to me. And that's it. Yeah. And a bot might not do that.
Yeah, part of the problem, like, I guess with therapy also is just like, I imagine the therapist isn't always on. Like, it's like they probably have off days themselves. They're probably, or they're sluggish, or they ate too many donuts right beforehand or something, right? I assume, right?
That's a great point. I mean, so the
AI is probably more consistent.
The AI is not exhausted by the 4 previous clients. The AI is not wigged out about the person who came in right before who might be suicidal, and they were actually legitimately
I imagine that's on your mind right now. Yeah. And then even if I think like relationships, like if you're having a conversation with your spouse, like you want to be super empathetic at the end. They're having a tough day. They told you something, and it's at the end of the day, but you also had your own day. So you're trying your best to do that, or best to have a good conversation. Like, could it be a spousal aid as well? Or
interesting. That's interesting. I mean, I actually can see a world where the AI become people's companions in a way.
Yeah.
depending on what that means. As a friend, the romantic interest thing.
Well, maybe not
I don't know.
romantic, but like part
Yeah,
of being a good, you and I are married, we're
yeah.
husbands, right? Part of being a good spouse
I mean, we're married to
there's
other people. We're not married to each
correct.
other.
We're not
Just for your
married to each
listeners. Yeah,
other. Yeah, exactly. Um, and but like part of being a good spouse is that we you have the romantic side for sure, but then there's also the empathetic side, being a
absolutely,
life
absolutely,
partner, being a there
absolutely,
supportive, being
absolutely.
and yes, I don't know the AI. I mean, maybe the AI will help on the romantic side. I don't know, but on the empathetic side, it does like some. I feel like I could be replaced. Like I feel like you might do a better job than me with my wife. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not too worried about that. Just because I do think that there is, you know, I mean, I think who knows, Auren, but
Yeah,
in my view, a lot of this stuff is going to augment what human beings do, not
yeah.
necessarily
Okay,
replace it. You know what I
make me
mean?
better. Maybe I'd be
It
a
could make you
better
a better
spouse.
husband. It could make you a
Yeah,
more
yeah. Oh
empathetic
no,
husband.
yeah,
It could make you, let's say you have a disagreement with your, not even disagreement. Let's say you have sort of, you feel like you didn't do your best in a conversation with your
yeah,
one spouse. You could go to the AI and say, you are a skilled relationship coach who is good at giving advice to people of a certain age. Let me describe to you a scenario that just happened. Please give me three
yeah.
ways to respond to this, and it might make you better.
Yeah. Yeah,
You might be
it's
able to get
or it's
if you blow.
listening in. It's like the zero.
Oh Lord, have
Yeah,
mercy.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know about
yeah,
that. Like sort
yeah.
of Dr.
Telling me it
Alexa.
might exactly.
Yeah, I always thought about that for translation. I think that's going to happen with translation.
It
I
seems
always
like it's almost here, right?
I
Yeah,
always wanted that when I'm traveling abroad because I don't speak any languages, but I have a smattering of enough where I can begin a conversation and then it just sort of gallops ahead of me.
yeah.
And I always wanted like a little earpiece in there of like sort of a Cyrano de Bergerac who speaks Spanish,
How
telling
is
me
that
what to
not
say
that is coming
and
very
repeating.
soon though,
Absolutely,
right? Yeah. I
absolutely. Well,
mean,
I mean, the thing where you type in.
yeah.
I mean, I've done
The
this
Google
traveling.
Translate works
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
Yeah.
You type in what you want to say, and then press the sound, and they say,
Yep.
and
Yeah, in fact, you could even speak it, and then there's the sound, and then they could
yeah,
speak it, and there's the sound. It just
right,
takes a long time because there's like a
right,
translator in the middle. What you
right,
want is like a real time kind
right.
of, so you can actually have a
I think that we
conversation.
will. I think that we'll get there. The downstream consequences on that are actually quite interesting too, because what it does, you already see a kind of a long tail and fat head of languages spoken in the world, where you have like basically five languages that everybody's speaking, and then it's like
Yeah.
a huge decline after that.
Well, this might change that radically, right? Because right now everyone needs to learn English. If you had if you had a something in your ear, maybe no one needs to learn English anymore, and so it could change that kind of winner take all language.
Maybe it could also, again, this is what's so interesting about this stuff is like, who knows? I mean, I
Yeah.
can also see it exposes more people even more to English,
Oh,
and
interesting.
then English just takes over. But right now, I mean, what you have Mandarin, Hindi, English, Spanish, and Arabic,
Yeah,
and
maybe
then
Russian or something.
massive, and even
Yeah.
like Russian, German, those kinds of things that were languages that people learned when, at least when I was like in school, in college. Japanese, those are still significant, but big
Yep.
drop off after that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, exactly. But like, I don't know, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but if we can all communicate, that's probably a good thing if we can communicate easily with one another.
It is a great question, and it's also, I think that I think you can make a very strong case that you don't, in the same way that you want biodiversity, you want linguistic
Yeah,
diversity.
that's right. Because it probably gets people thinking different. There's all these studies how like people in like maybe East Asian languages think very differently than people with like Latin-based languages based on like the character set and the formation of the language, et cetera.
Exactly. And then also, when languages die out, and many languages die out because there are culture and stories and wisdom contained in those languages that can't be retrieved.
Yeah.
if that language dies out fully.
Remember like I think it was like the late 70s when like Esperanto was like the big thing and everyone like, why did that never take off? It was just like,
Okay, you don't know this.
if you're enjoying this podcast, please sign up for our newsletter. Go to worldofdas.com. The link is in the description below. Now back to the video. No.
I'm obsessed with Esperanto.
Oh, you are? I had no idea.
I am.
I'm glad I asked the right question.
I have been wanting to write something about Esperanto for years because it's such a wackadoodle thing. All right. And I actually went in Vienna to the Esperanto Museum.
Oh, okay. Of course. There's a museum for everything. I love that there's an Esperanto museum.
And strangely, my wife Jessica and I were at the Esperanto Museum. It's a very small museum in Vienna. We were there for maybe 90 minutes. It's a very small museum. There was not a single other guest who came into that museum during that 90 minutes. I don't know if that's
strange or expected.
Oh, no, it's perfectly reasonable. I think that Esperanto is so whacked, okay? Because it's one of those things where it's like these utopian communities where it's like, you're like, okay, I see what you're doing here. I admire this impulse here. You actually care. You want to do something good. This is not going to work out, And so, it doesn't work out because for number one is that languages are not fixed; they evolve. That's fundamental to any kind of to any kind of language. In rare cases, sometimes when they're like sort of governments that systematically kind of eradicate a language and impose another one, you can do that. But without kind of an authoritarian regime, you can't impose a language on people. It is one of those things. It's like one of those.
They do. I mean, like in some ways, like a lot of these, like when the Soviet Union collapsed, there's all these kind of like languages that were kind of there, but like no one really spoke them. Like I don't think that many people spoke Ukrainian or something.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, that's the official language. Or like when the state of Israel got formed, it's like, hey, we're all speaking Hebrew. Like a lot of people are speaking lots of different other languages or something.
This is exactly my point. Without essentially a police state to enforce Esperanto, it's not going to happen.
That's right. Okay. Yeah.
And it's like unless it has such utility for people, it's going to emerge. And it's so what you have is you have the perfect storm of like it has limited utility and there's no police state behind it, so it's not going to go anywhere.
Maybe if it was like a cryptocurrency, at least there's a way people could make money and then they would like buy into it or something.
All you can do is with Esperanto right now is find a date with someone else who also is mysteriously interested in Esperanto. There is little utility. There's not a place in the world where you can walk into a store and start speaking Esperanto and have anybody understand what the hell you're talking about.
I feel like this would be a good movie or something.
That's what I thought. Yeah. I actually had on my I keep this list of like running ideas. I feel like there is a documentary to be made about Esperanto because it is a case of the people who started, the guy who started it. These are people who are hardcore idealists.
Are these guys are they in like a tweed jacket with their pipes? Like it's like they're like old communists, but then they kind of morphed over time or something.
They're less like communists than they are like kind of world government.
Okay, yeah.
Kind of, you know what I mean? End of the nation state.
Like with the Venn diagram with the literary society or something.
Yeah. And so it's like the people are just it's not like there's no the trouble with telling the story is that there's no villain. What you have is you basically have like you basically want Will Ferrell to star in this because it's like a hapless guy who's trying to do something and everybody knows it's not going to work.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yes, Esperanto the movie starring Will Ferrell. Auren Hoffman, executive producer.
All right, let's do it. We can raise some money for it right here on this podcast.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I know you've written about on Salespeople is that they have just how they're compensated. And I think like all of us, at least who have hired salespeople, have this kind of way of designing compensation and changing the comp and changing the weights and stuff. But you gave in your TED Talk, you kind of challenged the conventional wisdom about motivation and financial incentives. Can you kind of break down like how motivation actually works?
Yeah. So it's complex. It's nuanced here. Yeah. So it's not so much about there's a head fake here of sorts, in that it's not so much about the financial part of it. It has to do in some ways with the construction of the reward itself. There's a certain kind of reward that we use in organizations, a mainstay of sales compensation, which psychologists call a controlling contingent reward. I call it an if-then reward. If you do this, then you get that. If you do this, then you get that. What 60 years of science now tells us is that if-then rewards are pretty good for simple tasks with short time horizons, but they're less good for complex tasks with longer time horizons. And so as sales becomes less transactional, as sales becomes, especially in B2B, where the sales cycle can be very, very long, where the deal itself is fairly complicated, where you're operating as a manager. When we don't pay management consultants commission, and so
I think BCG consultants clearly do get a commission, right, from their sales. Like, I mean, they
get it. That's a fair point. That's a fair point. They get a bonus.
Yeah.
They get a bonus in part based on total
their book of sales.
On the billings that they have for that year. Fair point. So what I'm saying is that instead of automatically assuming that the way to motivate salespeople is simply to increase the size of the bonus, increase the dial down the base comp, dial up the variable comp. I think that's a mistake. I think the more you have high stakes contingent rewards, the more people are going to think short term and risk take the low road. And so now that said, I am not against I don't think the evidence says that we should be against variable comp of any kind. I think what it says for most jobs, including sales, is I think one should pay a healthy base salary. That is, there's a tendency to say the only way that you can get salespeople to sell is if they're hungry. So we're going to pay them a limited base salary so they can't feed their family unless they bring stuff in. I think first of all, hiring great people. That to me, those are the first three steps: hire great people, hire great people, hire great people, pay a healthy base salary, and then offer variable comp that is connected to measures that matter and that aren't super complicated. One of the things that I think companies don't factor in with a lot of these very, very complicated compensation schemes that fuel the book of business of compensation consultants is how much time they spend designing the comp scheme, administering the comp scheme, litigating disputes within the comp. It's like that's an extra carrying cost of these kinds of complicated. So I like simple, connected to measures that matter.
But I imagine like all these people get paid, where a big portion of their compensation is a bonus, which could be an executive, which is getting like stock-based kind of comp or something, or like anyone who works for a financial institution, which could be like a hedge fund portfolio manager or investment banker or something like that. Like you're saying, for all of those, like we should dial up the more guaranteed comp and dial down the variable for them, or how should we be thinking about it? Yeah.
It depends, because it depends on where you're starting at. I mean, a lot of the variable comp, a lot of the bonuses. Okay, let's take a hedge fund, or excuse me. let's take a hedge fund or any kind of one reason that hedge funds go up is because the overall market goes up.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, so it's like, it'd be like giving people a bonus for the sun for a sunny day rather than a cloudy day. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to think about how much is the individual contribution to that gain, how much of it is simply being in the system. What I want to do is, what my view is, like, hire great people, pay them well, pay them fairly, and use variable comp, but in very simple measures for measures that matter. For instance, like you go back to the wealth managers. I mean, they're getting a portion of, they get a fee for, and so it seems to be pretty well aligned that if the value of your portfolio goes up, their compensation goes up.
Yeah.
That seems to be reasonably fair. What we want to try to do here, though, is like we're dealing with, we're chasing a phantom in a way, or we're moving toward it's an asymptotic. There is no perfect compensation scheme. No matter what compensation scheme you have, someone will figure out a way to game it, and there will be some element of it that is unfair. And so, for me, again, I keep coming back to the idea of focusing on really on hiring great people. I think one of the things you see, particularly with sales, is the idea that anybody can do it. And therefore, we just hire somebody and an extroverted ex-athlete. And then
Right.
we put them in, because our compensation scheme is so carefully calibrated, we can deposit them in that compensation scheme, and we're going to get the outputs that we want. And that's foolish. Hire great people, pay them well, pay them fairly, and use variable compensation in a simple way, so that it's fair. If I sell more than you, I deserve more money than you.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things you see, forgive me, this is not going to be an Esperanto style rant, but it's going to. But if you look at I think one of the things that pisses people off is not so much in startup companies, privately held companies, but in public companies. You have CEOs who come in and do a demonstrably terrible job.
Yeah.
And get paid a huge amount of money. And so if they do a very good job, they get paid an insane amount of money.
But isn't that clearly just the shareholders' fault? Like, they could get rid of the CEO.
Absolutely, it's the compensation committees. It's the compensation committees.
There's obviously the board might be captured. Exactly. BlackRock and Vanguard may not care because they're just betting on the S&P 500 or whatever. Like, if someone was doing demonstrably bad job, I know it's like a private equity owned thing, that they would get rid of the CEO. Like, they wouldn't keep that person around. But in a public company where you have these shareholders with diffuse power, maybe no shareholder is more than a few percentage of the thing. Like, they just keep around these low performers.
It's a governance problem, but my view, absolutely. But it also can metastasize. Give you an example. GE, Jeff Immelt. Jeff Immelt was not a good CEO.
No,
right?
Clearly
by any
not.
measure.
Yeah.
By any measure.
Yeah.
And he made hundreds of millions of dollars. And meanwhile, General GE spun stuff out, spun it back together again, spun it out again, and thousands of people lost their job. That's not good for the integrity, for the well-being of the people in that company.
Yeah. Many people had G in their pension, and all this other types of things, and so
there's one guy who is so like right now, there is nobody out there complaining that Jensen Huang is getting paid too much money.
Correct.
Because NVIDIA has gone up, 87,000% in the last 24 hours.
Completely. I don't know what. I don't know how he gets paid, but my guess is like 99% of his wealth is just owning basic common stock in NVIDIA, whether he was, and so he's completely aligned with the success of the company.
You could pull his compensation package for some of these places. Their compensation package is beyond simply stock ownership.
I know, but I guess for him, it's just
for him, it's probably
the stocks got up so much. I'm sure it's like, it's some of these people. I mean, there are plenty of CEOs where they get paid like $1 a year, and like a Warren Buffett type person, their comp is all in their stock.
Yeah,
some of them get more stock over time. Now, what do you think of like the Elon Musk kind of famous stock grant where he got these like very out of the money options in Tesla? Nobody thought they would hit when he got them, and then they hit. And then now, certain maybe minority of shareholders sue because of that. Like, how do you think about that? Like, was that motivating him? Was it not? Like,
I don't know. Who knows what the hell's motivating him? But to me, that seems fair. It's
totally.
It seems totally. That seems totally fair to me. It's be like, hey, I went to a garage sale and bought a bunch of baseball cards no one thought were valuable, and it turned out they were really valuable.
Right.
And I was going to sell them. It's like, that's not. That's I really think, Auren, that we have in some ways an intuitive sense of fairness, and especially in the West sort of like the U.S. and to some extent Western Europe. It's basically we want some correlation between impact and compensation. And when that is aligned, people are generally fine with that.
Yeah.
This is why I don't think that you're ever going to have. This is why this country has never really had any kind of like groundswell, grassroots, pitchfork coming after the enormously wealthy. because I think in part because of the way that many people today have accumulated their wealth. If I'm using Google every day and the Google guys made a lot of money, it's like, all right, that's good. Hey, it's all right. They did something, you know?
That's super useful.
If Kevin Hart is making a huge amount of money and I've gone to like four of his shows and watch all of his movies, okay, good for Kevin Hart, you know?
Yeah.
It's when
if Dan Pink is making all this money, I read all of his books. Well, good for Dan Pink.
Sure, exactly. He's totally rolling in Kevin Hart money. And so, but I think I really think that a lot of this comes down to fairness. And we see research on this about how people inside of firms evaluate fairness. What they do is they evaluate fairness in sort of two dimensions, internally and externally. And so the best way to get somebody to quit, best way to get you to quit is if you and I are in a company, we have the same job and same level of experience, and you are demonstrably better, but I'm getting paid more. Yeah. You're going to quit.
No question about immediately. That. Yeah.
And so, because it's not fair.
Right.
If we were paid this,
even if I'm getting overcompensated,
exactly.
If I'm getting, if compared to like everyone else in the world, but in this particular situation,
compared to everyone else in the world, no one gives a shit about anyone else in the world.
Correct,
no one is saying, "Oh my God, I'm being paid fairly because someone in Burkina Faso doing my job is going to get paid less." No one has ever said that.
But even in a scenario where like they're paying me $10 million a year to, and I'm shooting basketball hoops, and you're getting paid $15 million a year, but I'm better at shooting basketballs than you. I'm going to be like, I'm moving to another team to get paid more.
Exactly. Exactly. And also, so you compare it internally, but you also compare it externally. So what is the going rate for a point guard in the NBA? And now again, the tricky thing about the NBA is that it has a salary cap. So that
and the tricky thing is that all the salaries are public.
Well, I think that's the really interesting thing. I think that pro sports pro sports is different because some of the leagues have salary caps, and also the compensation is determined in part by collective bargaining agreements.
Yeah.
So it's not
strong
like it's not like the labor markets in other kinds of things. But I do think that pro sports are a possible counter argument to people who fear this move towards salary transparency, where you can see the salary of anybody in your company.
Yeah.
And so because what you have is you have that two people sitting on a bench, two people on the same team in an NBA very small team, 12, 13 players, and everybody's salary, and they're big differences.
But in difference though, in like, first of all, there's only like 12 players a team or so in the NBA, and it's very clear. We can argue who's better, Steph Curry or LeBron James or something, but like, and that's a great fun argument. But there's very clear differences, like that anybody could understand by just looking at their stats between like Steph Curry and the number like 300 player, right? Like you could just look at the stat, you could like very clearly understand, and you also know like who's drawing like more fans to come watch the game, and like all those things are just like well known and very, very easy to quantify. Whereas like in a company, it's like that. And again, it's not perfect because even in the team, they have that glue guy who's like bringing everyone together and their stats aren't so good, but without them, but even there, you can look like points per minute when them on the field, points per minute when they're not. And you could start to try to understand. And there's so many great analytics. They just don't have those like in General Electric or something. No,
at least not yet. But again, and the other thing, this is a fascinating issue because the other thing is that I mean, in sports and in any realm, I mean, I go to any company or try this experiment. Go to any company, do a survey. Are you inside of this company of 1,000 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people? Are you, ask each person in a private survey, are you better than the average employee here?
Everyone will say yes. Right?
Yeah. 90% of people will say they're better than the average.
Yeah.
So people have a distorted view of their own.
So sometimes sometimes it will be realistic when you compare them. Are you better than Dan Pink?
Yeah.
You'll say, okay, I'm not as good as I'm a good author, but I'm not as good as Dan Pink.
No, he's the Kevin Hart of
right, totally. Yeah. No, in the federal government, like all salaries are public.
Absolutely.
And
they're lockstep, and there's
Yeah.
a ceiling.
I
And
don't know
this is
that
why
that is a good thing. Like, I feel like that does calcify things quite. Maybe it's not the transparency. Maybe it's just the fact that there's like a lockstep and like a other. I'm not sure, but it doesn't seem like it's good.
Having worked in the federal government myself, I think it has. I think it has some perverse consequences. I mean, again, I think it's well intentioned.
Yeah.
But what I saw, I was a political. So 100 years ago, I was a political appointee at the U.S. Department of Labor, and one of the things that I saw there, and then also he also worked, in some other political jobs. And one of the things that I saw among the federal workforce, as a Washington, among the federal workforce, is that you have, do a plus minus 10% on any of these numbers, but you had maybe 20% of the people working there were as talented and skilled as anybody you'd encounter anywhere, right? About 50% were fine. And then about 30% would have been fired from a private sector job.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'll disagree. I'll say that almost every private sector companies, I bet you the ratio is the same.
Okay, good.
There's probably 30% of their employees that have negative value. They're actually not even, they're literally negative value.
Great.
Like, so I just think most companies don't, like, I think it's very, very hard to fire the people. And unless you have like a really good reason to fire someone, most companies won't, and they just deal with these people have negative value. It's almost like free government employment or something, or UBI. It's UBI for like these 30% of people that have negative value.
UBI paid for by the company. It's
correct.
Company itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I bet you if we went to any company today, even a great company like Microsoft, there's probably 30% of people that are like adding negative value there.
That's interesting. That would be very interesting. Now, but the problem with that, though, at least in my limited experience, is that 30% really bums out the 20% who are good.
That's correct. It really does.
It hurts their performance. It hurts their well-being.
All these companies, it bums them out, and that part of the reason I think they have to compensate people so much.
Good argument.
Why does someone at a big company have to be compensated a lot more than someone at a small company of 10 people? Partially, it's because they have to deal with these 30% all the time.
So these 30%, they're basically they're costing the company a massive amount because you have to up the compensation of the 20%.
Correct. Yeah.
And
exactly.
So it's basically and they
take all this time by being annoying all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for those of you in the bottom 30% of your organization, congratulations on a pretty good gig.
Yeah, totally. But no one will ever admit they're in the bottom 30%.
No one's in the bottom 30%.
And it's kind of this fairness idea, like the employer-employee may not always agree on what like paid well and fairly means.
Absolutely.
Like, how do you find that common ground?
I think one way is that, as I said, people compare internally, but they also compare externally. So it's like internal equity. Equity is fairness, not ownership, but internal equity. Am I getting paid what someone doing my job at my ability level inside my firm is getting paid? And then also, what is the market paying? Like I'm in the Pittsburgh labor market, and I'm a full stack software engineer with 5 years of experience. We can find out a range of what they're getting. Now, what's interesting is that George Akerlof won a Nobel Prize in part for he won a Nobel Prize, but George Akerlof did research showing that the high performing firms were paying outside of that market, were paying above the market clearing wage. So you think about a Pittsburgh's full stack software engineer, the range is going to be here, and the higher performing firms were paying more than that. They were basically whatever this.
But because they were potentially getting a better class of person who could demand more or something.
But the thing is, like, the person would take the job at the upper end of the range. Let's say the upper end of the range is $130,000. They're paying $145,000, even though the person and so it seems counterintuitive. And there are a couple of reasons why that would be. Number one is that it raises the opportunity cost of quitting. Yeah, so that could be.
You're never going to leave if you.
The other thing is that I think sort of psychologically it does something else that's really positive, which is that For most jobs, there's a sort of an American fallacy where the way to improve performance on jobs is to get people thinking about money, and that's true for certain things. But in most jobs, the way to do your job better is to focus on the job, to focus on the work.
Yeah.
And so if you're getting paid outside the market clearing wage, it's like, I don't need to litigate fairness. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm going to focus on the job, and then you get higher performance.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
So I think
if you know you're being treated fairly from a compensation standpoint, if they recognize you in your, if they treat you well, if people are nice to you, like all the other kind of, if those needs are met, then yeah, might as well just like focus on the job and do a good job.
At some level, the best use of money as a motivator is to pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table.
Yeah.
So they're not thinking about the money; they're thinking about the job. Now, there's certain kinds of things where you want people thinking about the job, thinking about the money. For like if you've hired a bunch of envelope stuffers and you want people to stuff envelopes a lot and quickly, pay them per envelope, give them a bonus for every 500 envelopes. You'll get more envelope stuff. But beyond that, what you want people, you don't want them to think about the intrinsic worth and challenge of envelope stuffing and what it contributes to the company. But for a lot of things, truly the best use of money as a motivator is to pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table and just make sure it's fair. The thing I like about stock option, the thing I like about profit sharing is that in general, it's fair.
Yeah, totally.
If the company flourishes and I help the company succeed, I deserve a piece of the action. Absolutely.
Yep. Now, you wrote this really interesting book called When on like the science of chronotypes. For what is a chronotype and how do you figure yours out like reliably?
So that book is in part about that book is about timing in general. Not only so it's daily timing, which involves the chronotype, but also other elements of timing like how do beginnings affect us, how do midpoints affect us, how do endings affect us, how do groups synchronize in time. On this, so chronotype is essentially your natural propensity. Do you naturally wake up late and go to sleep late? Do you naturally wake up early and go to sleep early? And it turns out that that's more important than many of us realize. And in part because if you look at daily timing, all times of the day are not created equal. There are material differences in performance based on time of day, and some of that is key to what someone's chronotype is. And so what you want to what we know in the distribution is about 15% of us are very strong morning people, larks, just sort of naturally get up early and go to sleep early. I'm not one of those. 20% of people are very strong night owls. They naturally go to sleep very late and wake up very late. I'm not one of those either. I'm in the majority of people, but 2/3 of us are kind of in the middle. But we tend to lean a little bit more toward the larky side. The people who are the chronotypes is really disadvantaged in the workplace are night owls. People, now they're not lazy. They are simply.
No, they could get a job that promotes that. If you're in stand-up comedy, it's probably better to be a night owl or something, right?
Absolutely right. And there's a little bit of evidence of people opting out of professions because a good example is teachers. If you want to be a school teacher, you don't want to be a night owl, right? Because you're getting in the office at like 7 o'clock in the morning dealing with screaming kids. So if your natural propensity is to wake up, go to sleep at 2:30 in the morning and wake up at 10:30 in the morning, having you be at a job at 7 a.m. is suboptimal.
It's also hard to be a parent if you're a night owl.
It absolutely. I mean, night owls have it difficult because our world is configured for the 80% who are not. Now, what you see also, this is, I think, that one of the things about remote work, I think, sort of the hidden secrets about remote work and hybrid and how that's become almost a standard now, is that the remote is in some ways a proxy for the temporal aspect of it. That if I'm remote, I can more easily work when I want to work.
Correct.
Like I have control over the when of my work.
Especially if things are a little bit more async. If I don't have to have like a synchronized meeting at 8 a.m. or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So you can align it. There's also some evidence in this is a guy named Till Ronenberg, who's a chronobiologist in Germany, who's done some work with German manufacturing companies showing that when you get better production and less attrition when you basically discover people's chronotypes and then align their shifts to that rather than force them into whatever it is that they So I mean, if there's a lesson here for those of you who are bosses, it's be kind to your night owls.
No, I was thinking about this. I wrote this piece a while ago about like how people make decisions in time. And there's certain people who are really good at making decisions in like sub-second time. Certain people are really good at making decisions, let's say, over minutes. Certain people making decisions over an hour. Certain people make decisions over a few days. And then there's like the, like the Yuval Harari's are really good at making decisions like over a year's
millennia.
Yeah. Like they're more the academic, they're writing the big books or something like that, or maybe more the authors and stuff. And certain jobs are more like there's like salespeople, you have to be quick on your toes, or an athlete has to make sub-second decisions all the time. CEO might be more, let's say, within the hours. They have to make decisions within hours. Like they have to make them quick, but they at least can get some information in there. Is there like potentially like a biological piece to that as well?
I don't know. I think that's super interesting. I never thought about it in terms of decision making, kind of bounded by those time segments. I don't know. I think that it's fascinating. I mean, we tend to be, our evolution. I'm gonna guess here. I'm gonna guess on one dimension of it, but I just want to emphasize that it's a guess. It seems logical that the ability to make decisions very quickly in the moment is an evolutionary adaptation.
Yes.
Because if you see something that's a threat, you want to run the hell out of the way.
Yeah.
So I would think that is. In general, there is some. We're not very good at making decisions about our future selves. So that when the time horizon is quite long, our decision-making abilities deteriorate. Hal Hershfield has a very good book on this about how we make decisions about our future selves. And so we're not. So I don't know if that is.
That could also be. There could be like something smart about that. Like maybe we don't feel like our future self is completely related to us. Like maybe we think our self 10 years from now is like our cousin. They're like somewhat related, but it isn't really me because I'm going to.
But have you seen any of this research by any chance? Because you're exactly right. You got it 100% right. And basically, Hal Hershfield has research on this very topic. I'll give you what he did. Is that one reason? You got it exactly right, Auren. One reason that people don't save money is that they consider their future selves in some ways a different person. Why would I save money for my next door neighbor? Like that's not me. It's similar to that. I mean, cousin is actually a better example. So what Hershfield did is he showed people. So he had people make decisions forward looking, like 10 or 20 years, like retirement decisions. I'm going to get this 75% right in the details. He had people make decisions about retirement savings 20 years hence or 30 years hence. And so in one condition, they just made the decision. You have a choice to put away this much money. Do you want to do this? Yeah. And the other one, what they did, he showed them, and by the way, here's what he showed them the piece of software that does like age advancing. By the way, here's what you're going to look like in 30 years. So to say, no, this isn't your cousin, this is you. And when he did
some
that,
gray hair or something,
have you seen that software that age advances
of course,
you? Right. I'm actually using that right now. When you do that, people are much more likely to save for retirement because what you've done is you've closed the gap between thinking of you today and you in 30 years as the same person.
It's interesting because when I think of my past self, I always when I think of my future self, I think of it as me. But when I think of my past self, I always think of it as like a distant relative to me. I'm not really related to that idiot who used to think all those things 10 years, 20 years ago. Like I'm like somewhat related to them, but that wasn't me. But like 20 years from now, it is me,
Okay, so here we go. So this is ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the senior seminar in social psychology. This is This is the work Dan so Hirschfield did the research on sort of thinking of our future selves as different people. He's at UCLA, he does some really good work. Dan Gilbert at Harvard has done some research on this very issue. What he calls it is the end of history illusion. And this has to do with our own notions of ourselves and how we evolve and how we change. So almost word for word, what people do, Warren, is exactly what you say. It's like if you ask people, are you the same person you were 20 years ago? And by same person, I mean you have the same interests, same taste in music, same taste in food, and you say, oh no, my God, no, I've changed a lot.
Right, I've evolved.
Then they say in 20 years from now, looking at the same dimensions, interests, work passions, musical tastes, food tastes, it's going to be pretty much the same.
Yeah, totally.
And it's not. because if I asked you 20 years ago, you would say, I'm going to be basically the same. I asked you today, it's like, oh my God, that guy was a fucking idiot.
Right, totally.
And so Dan Gilbert calls this the end of history illusion, that we sometimes don't fathom. So they pair really nicely. We sometimes don't fathom how much we will change in our interests, in our preferences. There also are in a population level changes in our personality as we age. So over time, we become more agreeable. We become slightly more extroverted. We become less open. So it is. I mean, it is a fascinating issue and it goes to this. Our incredible brains is our ability to think past, present, and future. It's an incredible superpower. I mean, it's so complicated.
Speaking of the past, I want to just ask you about regret, because I know you wrote a book on it. Like, what does your research show about who experiences regret the most? What types of regrets people have, et cetera?
Okay, so on the first question, who experiences regret? Everybody. Okay. I mean, it is ubiquitous in the human experience. It is.
And regret could be like, I wish I did something differently earlier today, to I wish I did something differently 50 years ago type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's more a little bit more distant. So if only I had married Fred instead of Ed, not like if only I'd had chicken salad rather than a burrito. That's come up. As because I sometimes regret having like the 8th cookie or something.
Yeah.
So so what you see in this research is, including some that I did on my own, is that it's ubiquitous. It's one of the most common emotions that human beings have. It is arguably the most common negative emotion that human beings have. Truly, the only people who don't experience regret are people whose brains don't function properly to do that kind of
sociopath in a way.
Exactly. Sociopaths. People with certain kinds of brain lesions, certain kinds of neurodegenerative diseases interrupt that. 5-year-olds don't experience regret because they haven't developed the cognitive sophistication to go back. Think about what you're doing with regret. You're traveling backward in time. You're negating something that happened. You're coming back to the present. The present's not reconfigured because of your decision in this imaginary past. I mean, it's crazy. It's incredibly cognitive complex. Yeah. So everybody has regrets. So that's the most important thing. The second thing goes to one of your earlier questions, which is, so this doesn't make this in some ways doesn't compute, right? This because regret feels terrible. So why would something so ubiquitous, be so unpleasant? Like, why would we have this natural state where we regularly experience something that is deeply unpleasant? Yeah. And the answer is because it's useful if we treat it right. Yeah. We just haven't been treating it right, especially in sort of this overly indexed on positivity American life that we lead. And so what we should be doing with our regrets, and then I'll answer the other part of your question in a second, what we should be doing with our regrets is not ignoring them, sort of doing this kind of positivity, blah, 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 no regrets, no, everything happens for a reason. That's a bad idea. We shouldn't be wallowing in them. That's a worse idea. What we should be doing is confronting them, thinking about them, using them as data. And when we do that, it's a transformative emotion on many dimensions. Now, what do people regret? Okay, so at one level, there's overwhelming evidence that people regret what they didn't do much more than what they did do.
Okay, got it. Interesting. So it's not that I regret this person, sometimes someone will marry someone and then they got divorced and had bad experience. Like instead of that regret, they kind of regret like not asking somebody else to marry them or something.
Okay, I don't know. It's like your instincts are just so incredible here, Auren, because I did this survey in this book of 20. We now have a database of 26,000 regrets of people all over the world.
Yeah.
And one of the regrets is a regret of boldness, where you're at a juncture in your life.
Yes.
You can play it safe or you can take the chance. And overwhelmingly, when people don't take the chance, they regret that much more than when they take the chance. And it doesn't matter the domain of life.
When I speak to older people, that is the most common thing I hear. I wish I, followed and tried to be the actor. I never had that. I just became the accountant. I never even try. I could have took a year and tried to follow my dream type of thing.
Amen. And I literally have this database of 26,000 regrets, and hundreds of them are, I wish I asked somebody out on a date.
Wow.
And then in other research, there's a very strong age effect too. So people in their 20s tended to have equal numbers of regrets of action and inaction. People in their 30s, more inaction. People in their 40s, a lot more inaction. By the time you get to your 50s, 60s, it's overwhelming. It's 3-to-1, 4-to-1.
Oh, wow.
Inaction.
Unless maybe something really bad happened in their life, like they went to jail or something, or
if they did something, and they couldn't. Now the thing is about action regrets is that we can sometimes do something. There are two things we can do with action regrets that are psychologically healthy that mitigate some of the sting. We can make amends. So let's say that I hurt somebody.
Yep.
We have a lot of regrets about bullying, but also a number of stories about people going back to the people they bullied and apologizing.
Yes.
Trying to make amends. That's one thing. The second thing is that you can do what's called a downward counterfactual, is that what I like to call an at least. So let's take your example of the marriage. I should never have married Fred, but at least I have these two great kids.
Yeah.
We have a lot of things like this. So you can find a silver lining in it. But if I never asked this person out on a date, if I never traveled, if I never tried to start a business, I can't do either of those things.
Yeah.
And so they stick with you. They stick with you over time. So boldness regrets is a big category. There's another category that I call foundation regrets, where small decisions early that accumulate to terrible consequences later. I spent too much and saved too little, and now I'm broke. That's a quintessential example.
Yeah.
All right. There are moral regrets. We have not a huge category, but a very deeply felt category. You're at a juncture in your life where you could do the right thing or do the wrong thing. When people do the wrong thing, most of us regret it.
Yes.
Most of the time, because most of us are good and most of us want to be good. Yep. So we have regrets about marital infidelity, bullying, hurting other people. And then finally, there are connection regrets, which are about relationships that have come apart, often like in undramatic ways. They drift apart.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to reach out. They don't because they think it's going to be awkward. They think the other side's not going to care.
I think this is a super common one. It's like, Bobby and I used to be super close, and now I barely ever see him or something. And no breakup happened. It was just that for whatever reason, life intervened or something.
This is classic. That most of these relationships that come apart, it's a drift, not a rift. That's the language that we use. Yeah, it's a drift, not a rift. And so the thing is like one ought to do something about that. And so what happens is like you say, oh well, if I decide to reach out to Bobby after 20 years, it's going to be really weird, and he's not going to care one way or another. And
it's completely wrong.
We're wrong on both counts. It's not nearly as awkward as people think. And Bobby's always like the person on the other. Oh my God,
it's probably thinking the same thing. Yeah.
And also the thing is like what I've done I had this thing in this book that I wrote where I found a character who had this very tight friendship with somebody in college, and it came apart with a drift, and she didn't know what to do. And she, and it's like, I really should reach out, but it's going to be really awkward. She's not going to care. And I'm like, well, what if it were the reverse? What if she reached out to you out of the blue? What would you think? Would you think that was weird? She said, oh my God, no. That would be so touched by that. That would be like, it would make my day.
That's a great
and, and it's like, hello. So, truly the lesson of the connection regrets, this is a lesson I've taken as someone who hasn't been great at this for the first half century of his life, is that if you're at a juncture, for me, I'll tell you, your mileage may vary, but for me, this is what I do. If I'm ever at a juncture where I'm contemplating, should I reach out to this person or should I not reach out to this person?
Always reach out.
Reaching the juncture has answered the question.
Yes. That's right.
When in doubt, reach out.
What a average. I like that. Now, a couple of personal questions. You and I both live in the DC area, and we've become friends since I've moved here. What do you like about living in this area?
There are a lot of things I like. I like I like the other people who live here.
Yeah, so do I.
I think there are a lot of like super interesting people doing really, really interesting things. It is it's not homogenous on people's. It's a little homogenous on people's perspectives, but it's not homogenous on their professions, and so you get to talk to a lot.
I used to think like it'd be like only political people, but I don't even meet that many political people. Maybe I'm not
exactly.
Yeah.
So I like the people here. I also like the accessibility of being able to do things. I don't, you live all the way out in the mean streets of McLean, Virginia. I live in the People's Republic of the District of Columbia. But where I live in Northwest Washington, D.C., it's amazing. I mean, I'm sometimes blown away. Like, and I actually do this, especially now that I'm empty nester. It's like I can go to within like 15, 20 minutes of easy transportation. I can go to great theater, which I do. I can go to professional sports, which I do. I can go to world-class museums, which I do. I can go to excellent restaurants. I'm not fighting traffic. Yeah. I'm not living in a place that's like filthy and hellish with garbage piling on the streets. It's like everything is so accessible there, and it just I can also live in where I live now. I live in a city, but I have like a little yard. I live in a house with a little yard, and so I came to DC 30 years ago. My wife and I, thinking that my now wife and I, we weren't married at the time, thinking that we'd do our jobs here and then go somewhere else. And we ended up raising 3 kids here and growing to really love living here in DC.
That's amazing. All right, last question we ask all of our guests. What conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
I would say I think we sometimes tell young people to plan out their careers, to have a career plan, and I think that's generally a bad idea. I think that it's too difficult to plan with any kind of certainty. I think what you're better off doing is, and it's hard for people, and this is why I see people in my kids who are college graduates, so many of their friends like going into consulting, for instance, and they go into
that's why people became lawyers back in the day. If they didn't love the law, but they're like, well, I guess I got to go do something. Yeah.
Exactly. And so they go but they have this thing. It's like, okay, I'm going to become a consultant, and then I'll do that for 3 years, and then I'll go get an MBA, and then I'll go do something else. And then all this stuff is going to lead me to wherever.
Right.
And
I'll be Secretary of State.
It doesn't, or, even if you want to be Secretary of State, it's very hard to plan to be Secretary of State.
Yeah, totally.
And so to me, it's like this idea of this excessive career planning is bad ideas. I think what you should do is you should work your ass off. You should do great at what you do. And you should make decisions about your career based not on instrumental reasons, X is going to lead to Y, but on fundamental reasons. This is something where I can learn, where I can grow, where I'm interested in it, where I can contribute, where I'm with great people. I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
But I'll figure that out. And so dealing with that uncertainty and ambiguity, rather than the kind of the false certainty that if I work at consulting company or law firm, it's inevitably going to lead to something great. When in fact, I'm going to be miserable for a few years. So less planning, more making decisions for fundamental reasons rather than instrumental reasons.
Would you give the same advice for people thinking about their personal life, like getting married, having kids, like those types of things?
So that
if they're planning, I'm gonna get married by 30 years old, like I'm kids at 33, I don't know.
I mean, I empathize with that more than I do with
because there is a time you got to at some point you got to get moving.
The career stuff. I really do. I empathize with that more. So I'm hesitant to say no, you shouldn't do that. That if you're feeling like you're lonely and want to have you're lonely at a certain age and you really want to have kids, it's not. I'm hesitant to say.
Yeah, it's not going to get easier when you're. It's not going to get easier when you're 50. Like
So I have a lot more empathy with that than I do with the career the career stuff.
All right, this has been awesome. Thank you, Daniel Pink, for joining us on Roll of Dash. By the way, I follow you at Daniel Pink on X or Twitter or whatever it's called. I definitely encourage our listeners to engage you there. This has been a ton of fun, super interesting.
Hey, Auren, it was fun. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And if you're a super data nerd, go to worldofdash.com. That's DAAS, worldofdash.com, and sign up for our weekly Data as a Service news roundup newsletter. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider rating this podcast and leaving a review. For more World of DAS, and DAS is DAAS, you can subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts. And also check out YouTube for videos. You can find me at Twitter at Auren, that's AUREN, Auren, and we'd love to hear from you.